I close my banking app slowly, not rushing to check again. The numbers look steady, nothing alarming or urgent. Still, something in me doesn't settle the way I expected. We're not falling behind on anything important. Bills are paid, and the house runs as it should. But the calm I thought would follow never really arrives. I go over the numbers again in my head, almost automatically. Everything seems to add up the same way it did before. That's what makes it harder to explain to myself. If everything is technically fine, I wonder what I'm missing. The feeling of not enough shows up quietly, without a clear reason. It sits there, even when I try to ignore it. That night, I let the question stay a little longer. Maybe this isn't really about how much we have. Maybe it's about how it feels to hold it all together. The morning begins without effort. I move through the kitchen, preparing something simple. It feels like enough, at least on the surface. Mira smiles at her cup, amused by something small. Her laughter fills the space without asking for much. In moments like this, the house feels whole. Armand gets ready like he always does. His movements are steady, familiar, almost automatic. There's no sign that anything is missing. After they leave, the silence settles in. I tidy the table, noticing how everything is in place. It feels like it should be enough. At the store, I choose what we need. Nothing extra, nothing impulsive, just the usual list I already know by heart. At the cashier, I pause for a moment. The total feels heavier than expected, even when nothing has changed. Back home, I put everything away. The kitchen looks full again, but something in me still feels unfilled. I begin to notice a quiet pattern. Maybe enough isn't just about what we have. Maybe it's something we never really learned to feel. That night, I opened my expense notes again. The numbers hadn't changed at all. Somehow, neither had the feeling. We weren't spending carelessly. Nothing felt excessive either. Still, everything somehow landed right at the edge. I began noticing small patterns. The way we chose things felt slightly different now. Even how we compared ourselves had quietly shifted. Something felt different underneath it all. Our standards had moved slowly and silently. We hadn't even noticed when it happened. What once felt enough now felt ordinary. Nothing was wrong, yet nothing felt satisfying. And that quiet shift kept pulling us forward. It wasn't because we truly needed more. It was just what we had grown used to. That quiet sense of not enough stayed close. I stopped writing for a moment. The numbers no longer held my attention. For the first time, I felt this wasn't about math. It felt like something deeper. Not something visible in a bank account, but something I could feel every single day. The next day, I noticed something shifted me. I start paying attention to small decisions I usually ignore. Things that once felt automatic now feel more deliberate. At the supermarket, I reach for something slightly more expensive. It feels like a small upgrade, almost harmless. But I realize I didn't really need it. Later, I scrolled through an online shop without thinking much. Discounts pull my attention more than I expect. My finger almost taps by before I pause. I stop for a moment and sit with the question. Is this something we truly need, or just something I want right now? The answer doesn't come instantly. Sometimes the line between need and want feels blurred. Everything seems reasonable in the moment, and that makes it harder to notice. I begin to notice a pattern forming quietly. Our lifestyle has been shifting without us realizing. Just a little more, each time. Each small upgrade feels insignificant on its own, but together, they quietly move the feeling of enough further away. It happens without any clear moment. It's not that we don't have enough. It's that our definition of enough keeps changing, and I can feel how quietly exhausting that becomes. That afternoon, Mira walked over quietly, holding her drawing book close to her chest. I noticed how careful her steps were, like she didn't want to disturb anything. There was something gentle in the way she looked at me. She said she wanted to draw our house, but a bigger one this time. I smiled at her idea, though something inside me paused for a moment. It wasn't doubt, just a quiet question I couldn't name. I looked down at her drawing and stayed there longer than I expected. The house was small, the three of us standing beside it, with a bright sun above. Somehow, it felt complete. There was nothing extra in that picture, nothing impressive to show. But nothing was missing either, and that felt unfamiliar to me. I realized how rarely I let things be simply enough. I stayed quiet for a few seconds, holding that feeling gently. How could she see enough so clearly, without questioning it? It made me wonder what I had been missing all this time. I pulled her into a quiet hug without saying much. Her small arms wrapped around me so naturally, like nothing needed to be explained. For the first time that day, my chest felt lighter. It wasn't because anything had changed in our finances. The numbers were still the same as they were this morning. But something inside me had shifted quietly. Maybe we were never really lacking in the way I thought. Maybe the feeling came from somewhere else entirely. And maybe enough was something I had simply forgotten how to see. I sat alone at the dining table that night. The house was quiet in a way I hadn't noticed before. For once, I didn't reach for my phone or check the numbers. I began asking myself a simple question. What do we actually need to live well? And what have we just been wanting without noticing? Everything felt mixed together for so long. Needs, comfort, and small desires blurred into one. I never stopped to separate them clearly. Because of that, everything felt equally important. Even the smallest things carried weight, and I kept treating them all the same. Then a quiet realization came. If everything feels important, nothing truly is. That thought stayed with me longer than I expected. It wasn't about needing more money. It was about needing clearer boundaries, about knowing where enough begins and ends. For the first time, I didn't feel the urge to add more. I didn't look for ways to increase anything. I just wanted to understand what was already here. Maybe enough was never about numbers. Maybe it was something quieter than that. Something that comes when things finally feel clear. That night, I asked Armand to sit with me at the table. I didn't open any apps or notes this time. I just wanted to talk about how things had been feeling. I said it slowly, almost unsure of my own words. We make enough, but it never seems to land inside us. He stayed quiet, listening in a way that felt different. I tried to explain what I had been noticing lately. Needs, comfort, and wants had been blending without clear lines. It made everything feel equally urgent. We started writing things down together, not to restrict ourselves, but to understand what truly supports our life. The process felt slower than usual, but clearer. We didn't remove anything right away. We just placed each thing where it belonged. Somehow, that alone made things feel lighter. For the first time, the word enough felt more concrete. It wasn't just a passing thought anymore. It had shape and quiet presence. We didn't change our life dramatically. We only made it more visible to ourselves. That clarity brought a sense of ease we hadn't noticed before. That night stayed with me in a quiet way. Nothing dramatic changed on the outside, but inside, something had settled into place. The days begin to feel lighter in a quiet way. Nothing outside has really changed, yet something inside has settled. I notice my thoughts are no longer rushing ahead of me. I still shop the same way, walking through familiar aisles, but now I pause, not out of doubt, but understanding. Each choice feels more deliberate, not automatic. Armand speaks more carefully now, not with worry, but with clarity. His questions feel softer, almost like reminders instead of concerns. It changes the tone of our conversations. The tension that used to linger is no longer there. I don't feel the need to justify every decision in my head. Things feel clearer, even when they are simple. Myra continues drawing, just like before, but now I see something I didn't notice before. The simplicity feels enough, without needing anything more. Our home looks exactly the same as it always has. The routines haven't changed, and neither has our income. But the feeling inside it is no longer the same. I sit quietly and let the words settle in my mind. Enough is no longer something I chase. For the first time, it feels like something I already have. Nothing about our life is perfect, and it doesn't need to be. There is a quiet sense of enough that stays with me now. And that feeling feels steady, not temporary. Some days, nothing is missing, yet something feels unsettled. I pause in the middle of a small task, noticing the quiet around me. It's in this pause that I begin to see more clearly. The feeling of not enough doesn't always come from what we lack. Sometimes it comes from not knowing where to stop. When every choice feels equal, everything starts to blur. When everything feels important, I try to hold on to all of it, but that quiet pressure never really leaves. It follows me, even in ordinary moments. Slowly, I begin to understand what is enough for us. Not everything needs to be carried at once. And something inside me starts to feel lighter. Maybe true wealth isn't something we can measure. It's a quiet feeling that settles when nothing is chasing us anymore. And for the first time, it feels like enough.